Aaron Harber Show, the Energy Roundtable. This is part one of a special four-part series titled The Moral Cases For and Against Fossil Fuels. Joining me today from Liberty Oilfield Services, Chris Wright, an energy nerd from MIT, among other places. Chris, thanks so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Aaron. Look forward to the dialogue.
It's always good to have you on the show. And the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, Alex Epstein. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Looking forward to it.
And you came a long way from California just to join us. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, it was my only reason to be in Denver.
Okay. And climate activist Micah Parker. Micah, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing from you as well. And from Colorado State University, Professor of Atmospheric Science, Scott Dennings. Scott, again, thank you.
Thank you.
Great having you. All right, Alex, let's start off. Tell me a little bit about the book.
I think the basic premise of the book is that the way we typically think about this issue is very, very sloppy and irresponsible. So if we're dealing with energy, we're dealing with basically the food that all of our machines eat. This is the fuel of civilization. If we have more of it, we can do more. If we have less of it, we can do less. And so because it's such a huge issue, we're obligated, if we're considering all the different alternatives, to look at both the costs and the benefits of each alternative, and to do so very, very carefully. And I think if you look at most discussion about this issue, it's incredibly uncareful. People will only look at the benefits of the thing they favor and only at the costs of the thing they oppose. So the thing that I'm focused on in the book is first and foremost not pro-fossil fuels, anti-fossil fuels. It's what's the best course of action for human life. And I think if you look at that carefully, you conclude it's actually to use more fossil fuels, not less.
Chris, I want to get your thoughts on the book and on the argument in terms of favor of fossil fuels.
You know, I've had two passions from being a kid, and one is sort of science and really energy-related science, and the other is poverty. You know, I've been crazy lucky. You know, I was born in the 20th century, born in the United States, have had these great opportunities. So my focus has been, how can other people be as lucky as I am? How can they have the opportunities I have? My wife and I have traveled twice to the New Guinea, to the western half of the island of New Guinea, people that don't even have agriculture yet. And life pre the Industrial Revolution, pre-abundant energy, was quite different. Life expectancy was half or less than half than it is today. Life was short. Life was a struggle to stay alive and to realize dreams and big ideas, whatever they are. Not so possible in that setting. You know, as you know, I went to college to work on fusion energy. After graduate school, I worked on solar energy, worked years on geothermal energy. So as you say, I'm sort of energy source agnostic. How can we get more and plentiful energy with the smallest impact possible? But the majority of that time has turned out to be in what I believe by far and away the greatest choice we've got today, which is fossil fuels. So the shale revolution is most of what I've done the last 15 years. But yeah, I think energy has been an enormous force for good in the world, and we'll talk more about that with our colleagues on the panel.
All right, and Micah, I mean, I know your concerns about the planet and our consumption and use of certain energy resources, the impacts that usage has, and I know you have a lot of concerns about that. What are some of your thoughts about, you know, what the premises Alex has articulated?
So, you know, I think that it's important actually to be aware of where we are in history. And when we look historically, I mean, if you look far enough back, obviously we have existed through most of human history without fossil fuels. We've only been using them really the last couple hundred years, 180 years or so. And they have allowed for wonderful comfort and convenience and a really incredible growth of human population. If you look historically, we've gone from about 1 billion people prior to fossil fuels to now 7.3 billion people on our planet. And so we've had incredible growth because of fossil fuels, but I think that the thing that we're starting to realize is that at this point in history, we're coming up against some really hard limits. We've seen exponential growth in our consumption of fossil fuels, in our human population, and also in our natural resource depletion, things from fisheries to our forests. We're seeing extreme animal extinction. We've had such an impact because of our population growth and our resource depletion that now scientists are beginning to call this epoch the Anthropocene. So I think that fossil fuels has allowed us to grow and grow, but at some point, especially on a finite planet, you can't grow forever. And we're starting to see the results of some of these hard limits that we're coming up against. And to me, the biggest point around that is climate change, global climate change, the fact that we're using fossil fuels, our atmosphere is a dump for the emissions that comes from burning fossil fuels. It's having an incredibly devastating impact on our global climate and the carrying capacity of our planet. So I think that we need to look back and say, sure, for the last 150, 180 years, fossil fuels, if you just look back, have done amazing things for humans. Looking forward, though, we're in a different time period. And knowing what we know about global climate change and all the other impacts that we're beginning to have, it's time to shift. And fossil fuel energy is not the only kind of energy source we have, fortunately. We have renewable energy resources, and we can talk about that more later.
Okay, and I want to give Alex and Chris a chance to respond to that. But Scott, what are some of your most significant concerns?
Well, I also enjoyed reading the book and agree with Alex on a lot of this. Certainly agree that the use of energy is an important part of our world and has improved people's lives tremendously. In a way, I kind of think the premise of the book is half right. Really should maybe say the moral case for the use of energy as opposed to the moral case for the use of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are one source of energy that we use in our society, but it's by no means the only way that we can make energy in our society. And exactly as Alex said, we need to look at costs and benefits, right? We need to look at both sides of these stories. So there are certainly benefits to burning carbon, to heat water and drive turbines and make electricity and all that. There are also downsides. So the big downside that I work on, of course, is that the CO2 that's produced every time we burn carbon goes into the air, stays in the air. It's not a chemically reactive gas. It accumulates over time in the air, and it absorbs heat. As most people know, heat warms things up. So you got basically sort of fundamental principle of the universe. Heat in minus heat out is change of heat. We've known this known this since we were cave people, I suppose. So as we add CO2 to the atmosphere, slows down the loss of heat by the planet, and therefore warms up the Earth. No big deal if it was a small amount of warming, but if we were to try to fuel the development of the other 6 billion people on Earth that don't use energy like we do, by burning carbon, we wouldn't just increase the CO2 a little bit, we would increase it a lot. And that would add a lot of heat to our world and would change our world in big ways. It would probably have economic impacts that are far in excess of the benefits that we might get from that fossil fuel. So looking in a balanced way at the costs and the benefits, I and almost everybody who's looked at this problem in detail, talking science, engineering, feel that the conversion to other sources of energy the benefits totally outweigh the costs.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back to address those issues and talk about what sources of energy make sense and can we use too much energy. We'll be right back.
If you double the amount of CO2, I have a prop. You add this much heat to every square meter of the planet. Maybe people are too young to remember these things. This is a 4-watt incandescent light bulb.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Because I've never done endorsements or commercials, people ask how are our programs funded, especially because we provide them as a public service to all our broadcast outlets. It's expensive to produce our show, whether we do them here in Denver or go to places such as Aspen, Washington, D.C., or even Iraq. The answer is we depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to help allow us to continue to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, just go to dmefd.org. The DMEF is a tax-exempt public charitable organization and has promised to dedicate 100% of every contribution to support our public affairs initiatives. If you believe, as I do, in the need for a forum which promotes civil discourse and mutually respectful discussion, I hope you'll decide to make a contribution today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the Energy Roundtable. We're talking about climate change, fossil fuels, and a number of related topics. Alex, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to some of the comments that Micah and Scott made. Do you have some thoughts on those?
Yeah. I want to point out some points that came up that I think are illustrative of this kind of thing. So let's talk about one with the positives and one with the negatives. And particularly, what are the unique positives of using fossil fuels versus not using fossil fuels, and then what are the unique negatives of using fossil fuels versus not using fossil fuels. So one thing that came up is this idea that, well, I'm not just making a case for fossil fuels, I'm making a case for energy, because throughout the book I show the connection between fossil fuel energy and all these benefits to human life, and the idea is, well, we don't need to use fossil fuel energy. And I think that needs to be broken down and looked at a lot more carefully. So imagine we said this in the realm of building materials. I wrote a book about how much good steel has done, certain very strong structural metal. And then somebody said, okay, that's true, we need strong structural metal or strong structural material, but I think we can do it with renewable wood. So we can build our skyscrapers out of wood. Well, you'd say, no, some materials, some products are better than others, and it depends on how good they are at the job and how resource efficient they are. Because if they're not resource efficient, they take a lot of resources and they cost lots and lots of money. So in the case of energy, that means the energy is either not cheap, not reliable, not plentifully available to people. So what's really interesting about this debate is that the opponents of fossil fuels in particular focus on what they call the renewables, but that's a misleading term for a couple reasons. One is that it generally excludes large-scale hydroelectric energy, which is by far the most resource-efficient form of renewables. What they focus on is what should be called the unreliables, solar and wind, things that come in very unevenly and that don't exist in the form of independent power stations. They're always supplemented by coal, supplemented by gas, and this is why in Germany you hear these very misleading statistics about, oh, they got half their energy from this. First of all, they usually mean electricity, which is only half the energy a society like Germany uses. But even within that, that just means that occasionally you get a spike. But the vast majority of the time, averaged out, you're getting less than 10%, and you can rely on it really 0%. So at the same time Germany is scaling solar and wind, jacking up their electricity prices to 3 or 4 times ours, they're using more and more coal. So when we're talking about the relative benefits and costs, I think it is really disingenuous to treat the unreliables as the same caliber as fossil fuels. And also it's interesting that there's an opposition to nuclear and to hydro by the people who claim to care about climate. I'm not saying that's necessarily true of the people here, but it's a general opposition. And this indicates their focus is not on human life, but it's on being quote unquote natural. They like the idea of getting energy from the sun and the wind, and that trumps what are the actual efficient ways to get energy. So that's on the one side. I think if you think carefully, you come to a very different conclusion. Now on the negative side, if we talk about the climate issue, I want to point out how imprecise and unspecific the claims are about the magnitude. So it's very important if you're talking about, let's say, a temperature increase. Is this a linear temperature increase? Is it steady that way? Is it a logarithmic one, which means one that's decelerating? Is it one that's accelerating? Because that's what we'd be really worried about. And then if somebody says that it's accelerating, or it says any of these things, what is their evidence? What is actually demonstrated and what is speculated? speculated. And what was interesting in the claims that Micah brought up, every single one of them I document in the first chapter of the book, The Secret History of Fossil Fuels. Every single one of those has been made by many of the same thinkers for 35 years and has been completely the reverse of the truth. So one thing when we're thinking carefully and we're looking at experts is we ask, what is their track record? Another thing we ask, and this goes to what Scott was mentioning, is what, even if somebody is a professional in the field, are they differentiating between what is speculated and what is demonstrated? And so what's demonstrated with regard to CO2, if you isolate it, is that it's a logarithmic decelerating effect. Now, people speculate that when in the actual atmosphere, there are what are called positive feedbacks that will lead to dramatic warming, and this is the basis of many dramatic predictions.
Okay,
but
so
if you look at the track record, those fail.
So for the positive feedback loop, what you're saying, what that does is actually accelerates the process.
So the claim is just there's this dramatic warming, and you hear these predictions, and if we use this much coal. But the question is, what's the track record of that claim, and is it speculated or is it demonstrated? I'd say it's very much speculated, and the models that are used to make that claim have been invalidated. They've been false over and over. So I don't think it's honest, and I don't think it's careful to act as if climate prediction models that can't predict climate are making accurate predictions. I think it's the responsibility of experts to acknowledge that.
Okay, so and my role is I'm the viewer. I'm someone who's not as well informed as you four, so I have lots of questions, and I'm trying to figure this out, like what's really going on and what's happening. So one of your points, as I understand it, is as the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, of carbon dioxide, for example, goes up, and we're at right now 400 parts per million right now. So one of your arguments is it goes to 5 or 6, it's not necessarily having a 25% or a 50% increase. You're saying it's kind of plateauing.
Well, I'm saying you have to look carefully at what the evidence is, because there's a question of what you can demonstrate in isolation, where, if you shine light in a box, like what can you figure out about the nature of this effect? And the point I'm making there is in isolation, it is a logarithmic decelerating effect. And this is something in any debate, in any discussion I've had on this issue, the opponents of fossil fuels have never led with this point or even mentioned it. I always have to bring it up. The implication that you get is, oh, it's exponential, it's accelerating, and that would be genuinely scary. But I can't.
It would be scary even if it were linear. And you're saying it's
arguable. That's arguable. I mean,
and you're saying it's not linear.
That's true. But
to be fair, that's what we say too. I mean, we know this. We've known this for 120 years. Climate science has always known that this is a logarithmic effect, and
a decelerating logarithmic effect.
Yeah, meaning that every doubling of CO2 provides a linear increase in the amount of heat retained.
Okay. All right. So given that, as a layperson, should I be less concerned then?
No.
About the increase in CO2?
No.
Why not?
Because the doubling of CO2 is easily in our reach by burning lots of carbon. As you add CO2 to the atmosphere, it absorbs more heat. We expect that to warm up the climate for exactly the same reason we expect day to be warmer than night, for exactly the same reason we expect summer to be warmer than winter, for exactly the same reason we expect Fargo to be warmer than Phoenix. It's not rocket science here. If you add heat to things, they change their temperatures. If you double the amount of CO2, I have a prop. You add this much heat to every square meter of the planet. Maybe people are too young to remember these things. This is a 4-watt incandescent light bulb.
I thought it was a Christmas tree light.
Yeah, when I was a kid, they were Christmas tree lights. When my kids were little, these were night lights that helped them find the bathroom, but pretty much everybody's seen these. If you imagine one of these light bulbs every 3 feet, every meter, but not just here in this room and not just in Denver, but the whole world with one of these light bulbs every 3 feet, and you leave those light bulbs on for hundreds of years, you would expect the ground to get a little bit warmer. Not a lot, but a little. The trouble with, I think, with Alex's argument is that he would like to raise the standard of living for the entire planet, 7.5 billion of us, to a sort of American standard of living by burning carbon. And if we did that, we wouldn't just double the CO2 once, we would easily double the CO2 twice. So that's 2 light bulbs on every square meter, and that's a lot of heat. This is not a difficult thing to understand. It doesn't depend on models. It's not something that we've only discovered in the last 20 years. We've known this for 120 years. The rule of thumb that each doubling adds a linear amount of warming has been known since 1896. So it's not something that we discovered with computer models. This is something that you can measure in a laboratory. In his book, Alex doesn't even dispute the idea that CO2 absorbs heat and that it's in fact measurable in the laboratory. So I think it's not a surprise to climate scientists that there's this every doubling produces a linear amount of heat. That's a very well understood thing. It goes right into all of our predictions.
The problem is the media and the politicians that take these things, and you hear all these claims, faster than we thought, it's running. This is mostly not made by the scientists. In fact, let me make a couple other quick comments. Scott talked about, I think it's somewhat extreme for 2 doublings of CO2, but certainly in the realm of possibility. The also somewhat uncontroversial math is how much does the planet warm with a double of CO2 without feedback effects? A little over 1 degree. 2 doublings, a little over 2 degrees. We've warmed a little less than 1 degree in the last 150 years. If we change the temperature of this room by a little less than 1 degree, less than half the people would notice. So the planet is warming. CO2 is adding to that. These are uncontroversial. So that's widely accepted. The question is the magnitude and what's the impacts of it. And if you see in the temperature data, of that little bit less than 1 degree of warming we've had, roughly half of it happened before the end of World War II, before humans had meaningfully changed CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. The other half has happened since then. And then the temperature's roughly plateaued the last 17 years since my daughter was born. So it's a real impact. The question's the magnitude of it. The technical questions around feedback, when CO2 warms it a little bit more, water vapor evaporates. Water vapor is a more important greenhouse gas than CO2. Hey, maybe that'll amplify it. Maybe it'll form into rain and fall out of the clouds. Maybe it won't amplify it. The data to date doesn't make much of a case for amplification, which is why even the IPCC have lowered their lower bound estimate of how much warming from a doubling. So it's a real issue, absolutely. I think we all agree on that. The question's the magnitude and the trade-offs involved.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
The air quality in Denver has gotten dramatically better, as it has in the United States. Since my lifetime, the air's gotten dramatically better, the water's gotten dramatically better, but yet our population's up 50% nationwide and doubling in Denver area. And we've all gotten wealthier and consume more energy.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. It's tough for me to limit myself to 140 characters, but you can see how well I do by following the show on Twitter. Follow me at @Aaron Harber.
To obtain a DVD copy of this program, please contact info@harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We're going to take some time to look at some of the graphics and information that Micah has been kind enough to provide. And we're going to fly through some of these, but I want people at least to see these on the screen. Our first one, human population growth. Just tell me quickly, what does this show you?
Well, it shows that since we began using fossil fuels, that throughout human history, our population really stayed below about 1 billion people. And since we started using fossil fuels in the beginning of the industrial era, our population began to exponentially increase, and it's increased now to 7.3 billion people. And the point that I wanted to make with this is that fossil fuels have allowed for tremendous growth, convenience, comfort, but it's also caused a really tremendous impact on the planet through our population growth and through our consumption of resources. We've exponentially used fossil fuels, we have exponentially used resources, we're seeing fisheries depletion, we're seeing all sorts of impacts on our planet, forest depletion, and even depletion of conventional fossil fuels. We've begun to see some shifts in our consumption. The next slide actually shows that conventional fossil fuels, the kind, when you see Beverly Hillbillies and it comes bubbling up,
That's
the easy.
That's in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Do you think we have too many people on the planet?
Well, we're definitely starting to see some impacts.
Should we have a limit on the number of people on the planet, do you think?
Oh, I think we're going to hit hard limits, just like if you study ecology, any animal runs up against hard limits when they are in a closed system. You can't grow forever.
What do you think, if you had to guess, what do you think that limit is?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's a tough question. I think that
pick a number.
Probably now.
Okay, roughly 7.5 billion. Chris, jump in.
Micah, let me just ask you to shed a little more color on that. Like, I grew up here in Denver. And so 40 years ago, when I was a kid, we had a report every morning on the brown cloud. Was it dangerous? Was it extreme? Was it moderate? Was it light? I mean, air pollution in Denver area was huge. Now the population in Denver has doubled. And they don't talk about the ground cloud rating anymore. So the air quality in Denver has gotten dramatically better, as it has in the United States. Since my lifetime, the air's gotten dramatically better, the water's gotten dramatically better, but yet our population's up 50% nationwide and doubling in Denver area. And we've all gotten wealthier and consume more energy. So the impacts are there, but do they scale linearly with people and energy use?
Well, it's the pollution levels. Maybe you don't see it quite as well. I definitely see the smog and things, the air pollution from where I live. When you look at ozone, we're in non-attainment and have been for quite a few years now. From ozone and ground level.
That's from a lowering
ozone.
of the standards, not from a rising of the ozone concentration. Compared to 40 years ago, the ground ozone's dramatically lower.
Well, we're in non-attainment in the Front Range in the Denver area, in the northern Front Range in the Denver area for ozone, which causes tremendous health effects, especially for people with respiratory issues. And so we still have a lot of serious pollution issues, and especially since we've been fracking since 2008 or so, when there was a huge uptick in the amount of fracking in this region, we've seen even worse ozone issues. And so we are having a lot of pollution issues here and around the world as well. I mean, gosh, if you've seen some of the photos from China, it's unbelievable.
No, it's horrendous. If you had a choice of living in the world today versus living in the world 40 years ago, which would each of you choose? Scott?
Well, I've lived in the world more than 40 years. So I think that...
I'm younger than you.
Yeah, that's nice. So I actually think the world is pretty good where I live. But I think we all would recognize, and I think actually Alex makes a pretty strong case in his book, that the world is not a very copacetic place for a whole lot of people.
Right, fair enough. Micah, how about you?
I'd say now, too. I mean, we're at a really, we're at a pivotal moment in human history right now where we are... it was perhaps easier 40 years ago when we didn't know everything that we know quite as we didn't. I guess a lot of the scientists knew, but the average person didn't know what we're facing. But we're also at an exciting point. It's challenging, but I can see a vision for a new way on this planet where we can transition things. And I think we have a responsibility to usher that transition to clean, renewable energy and to shift away from 20th century energy. So I'm excited to do that.
Alex, and I know we're running out of time.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are we out of time? So just very quickly, absolutely today, but I want to address this idea of the finite planet or the carrying capacity.
We're going to have to come back to that. And Chris?
Absolutely today. And, but 40 years ago, there was a belief mass starvation was 20 years away and resource depletion was happening by the end of the last century. So that hasn't changed. But the quality of human life and the cleanliness of the environment in this country have gotten dramatically better in the last 40 years.
All right. I want to thank my guests. Stay tuned for more. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.